This program is made possible by PSCA, the Plan Sponsor Council of America. For over 60 years, PSCA has served retirement plan sponsors through education, advocacy, and research. Information at psca.org or at 312-419-1863.
Welcome to this episode of Money Sense. I'm your host, Anthony Contrucci. The new three-legged stool in life as it pertains to total wellness consists of financial wellness, physical wellness, and behavioral wellness. Money Sense was created to help our viewers begin to create a plan for their own financial wellness. Studies have shown that financial stress can lead to illness, reduced productivity, and increased distraction. This series brings together experts to take a common sense approach to helping people better understand a variety of financial wellness topics. Each week, you will meet and hear from industry leaders who will explain the basic concepts you need in order to find your own sense of financial well-being. This week, we'll be talking about understanding credit and debt.
Hello, and welcome to Money Sense, a show dedicated to helping you increase your financial wellness and achieve your future goals. I'm Rob Dukoff, Dean of the Layton School of Business and Economics at Indiana University South Bend. As Dean of a business school, I value the opportunity to partner on the production of Money Sense, because being sensible about how we manage money is an important skill for all of us. The subjects of today's program are credit and debt. You may be familiar with a quote from Dave Ramsey: "You must gain control over your money, or the lack of it will forever control you." Some statistics suggest that we are not doing a good job following Dave's advice. The average U.S. household has over $15,000 in credit card debt. The average student graduates with loan debt of almost $33,000. Getting into too much debt can happen for various reasons: illness, someone may lose their job, a relationship may break up, a business may fail, there may be unexpected home repairs. Sometimes we just spend more than we should. At Indiana University, we're working hard to help raise our students' awareness about the dangers of excessive borrowing and trying to help them make smart decisions about money. Thank you for watching today's program.
Today our guests are Dr. Ense Saksena and Jeff Sanson. Dr. Ense Saksena is Assistant Dean, Director of Graduate Studies, and Professor of Accounting in the Layton School of Business and Economics at the Indiana University South Bend. He completed his initial education and gained experience in public and private accounting in India. Jeff Sanson is the Executive Director of the Indiana Council for Economic Education. The ICEE network, consisting of 11 university centers for economic education, provides workshops and programs to Indiana teachers and youth educators on a variety of economic and financial education topics. Thank you both so very much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Anthony. Thank you for inviting us.
So my first question I'd like to kick it off with is, how long has debt been used in the United States?
So debt is really as old as time. We can trace it back to when the Pilgrims came to the U.S. Debt was being used. Credit, we can take back to Neanderthal days. And I can see a picture of someone making a wheel and bartering for some mammoths in exchange. And it turns out that they didn't have enough. So they said, give me a wheel now, I'll give you some extra mammoth when I catch one the next time. So debt or credit is as old as time.
Okay. Interesting. So that kind of frames out, I think, a lot about debt. But now let's fast forward to today. How and why do people use debt today? Why do they borrow?
So, I mean, we have unlimited amount of things that we want in society. So, you can just list dozens of things: goods, services, all sorts of things. Some of those we can use our earned income and our savings to purchase now. Some of those things we don't have enough financial resources to acquire, so we need to borrow. We need to find someone to loan us the money in order to acquire those things that we think are valuable to us right now.
Okay. Pian, anything you want to add?
Right. I would say sometimes it's us wanting to keep up with the Joneses.
Okay.
It's us wanting instant gratification. We don't have the resources to buy what we need. And so we find an easy way out, in my opinion, which is simply take on debt to get those things.
Well, that's interesting, because you said need, and we all have needs, but sometimes is it something we need or something we want?
Right.
I think so. Maybe segueing into maybe another kind of theme here is, it sounds like there's some positives that go along with borrowing and debt to a certain degree, but why is it a problem per se right now, And maybe kind of follow up with that is, how has that maybe problem evolved with different generations over the past maybe half a century?
So what's happened is we've gotten used to, in many cases, sort of easy money. It's driven by generations and how they grew up and scarcity. So the generation that came through the Great Depression, they knew how difficult things were. And so they saved a lot in terms of things, and then they were not going to throw their money away or buy simply for what they wanted.
They want, correct.
Yeah, the needs were most important. So they have the least amount of debt. If you go back and look at them, the greatest generation now is what they're called. Baby boomers came into the age of credit and credit cards. So they have sort of the highest amount of credit card debt. Their utilization ratio is still good. Their average credit score is good, not as good as the greatest generation. You look at the Generation X, and now we are talking about a group that's most in debt and carrying the highest amount of debt. Utilization ratio about 20% more than what the baby boomers had. Credit scores still okay, but not as good as the baby boomers. And then the millennials are in trouble. They haven't had enough time to really accumulate all this debt, but they're well on their way to accumulating a lot of debt, and actually their credit scores are the lowest in these four groups.
So we talked about this concept of need and want. So how can you help our viewers understand, how do you kind of determine what is a need, what is a want, what is maybe good debt versus what is maybe bad debt?
So I'm an accountant by training, and I look at assets. I would say any asset which appreciates in value, and you take out debt for that, is a good debt. So a quick example would be your house. Now you have to be careful. You can buy too much house.
Okay.
So you want to buy the appropriate amount of house that you can afford given your income and future prospects and given what you need. Right? If you're a family of four, for example, which is what we are, I find it hard to believe that you need a 5,000 square foot home. Because remember, it's all connected. You not only have to pay for that house, you have to pay for maintenance and upkeep and repairs, and all those things have to be budgeted in the future.
Correct.
So you want to be careful. It's an appreciating asset, and yet you don't want to over leverage yourself. If it's a depreciating asset, you want to be really careful. That nice, snazzy sports car that we are starting to see because spring is coming.
So automobiles would be in that category.
Be careful. Buy a good, safe, reliable vehicle. Don't go overboard. It's a depreciating asset. So that good debt versus bad debt.
Any other examples on the depreciating asset side for our audience today?
If you're borrowing money to buy furniture,
okay,
sort of be careful.
Okay.
Because borrowing money to go on a vacation, that is, you use it and it's gone.
It's gone.
Yeah, and then you end up paying for it for 4 or 5 years. So in my opinion, that's bad debt.
Jeff, is there a criteria that our viewers can use to determine whether or not debt is appropriate for them given a purchase?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, talking about the good versus the bad debt, and what we always look at is you want to prioritize, right? So, depending on your own set of circumstances, you want to decide, all right, these are the things that are most important to me, and so if you can acquire those with either your savings, or if you determine that college is something that you want to borrow money for, that might be an appropriate selection of, that might be a good use of debt. But you also want to look at what is the cost. So not only your current cost, but fees that are associated with the different types of loans or credit cards. There's going to be a variety of different financial costs that will be incurred as a result of you taking on these different loans. And so those are different, at least a couple of the different criteria you want to think about before you actually take out the loan.
Okay, so
if I could make a quick point on education. Mm-hmm. I am a firm believer in education. I had a university and had education which has brought me to this stage of my life. One has to be careful. Student loans are now over $1 trillion in this country. And we have to be careful. We don't simply take out loans to go to school, end up with a degree that may not lead to us having a job and then a career. So I think one has to be smart in picking the right degree for the right reasons, which will turn into a job and then a career.
What is the impact of that degree? And really, being proactive, doing your due diligence before you make this big investment. Is the return on the investment, I know they call it a lot of times ROI, going to be there to justify the cost?
Right. You always have to do your homework on any of these decisions. So whether it's the education, which is a big one, or is it worth using a credit card on that pizza delivery? So.
Right, no, absolutely. So we've kind of, you've shared with us that it sounds like there's various sources to borrow, for debt. Let's maybe flip the script a little bit, and maybe you can just maybe shed some light, Pian or Jeff, on what do lenders look for typically when they're looking at that potential client? What are the key things that they're looking at to determine the financial wherewithal, let's say, of that client, sure, and their ability to repay?
There's three things, and we like to call them 3 C's. We look at character, they look at collateral, and they look at capacity. So character, can I trust that you're going to be able to repay this? It's very important when a lender is evaluating a potential lendee. You need to look at capacity. So do you have the income? Do you have the future income to be able to pay that back? And then collateral. Should, in the event that you're unable to pay that debt back, do you have something that can be sold in place of and to repay the loan? Because it's important to understand that lenders are not they're not charities. I mean, they are in this to provide a service to you. They're providing money for a fee, and so these are things that they're using to evaluate. And actually, some of the new legislations require that they actually look at the information. And they'll use things like credit reports. And so this is why it's important to know, what it is being reported to lenders and understand how your own financial habits can have an impact on your ability to earn credit or to receive credit and the cost that you will pay for that credit.
You mentioned a couple different times about kind of education and really preparing yourself to make these decisions, being informed. Are there any sources you guys can maybe refer to where our viewers can go to become better informed? And when they're working with these potential lenders or the various sources of borrowing and debt?
Sure. There's numerous sources. You can start with some of the federal government websites. The Federal Reserve Bank, for example, has a wealth of information on various types of financial literacy. Plus, they have a lot of the kind of current statistics on household debt and things of that nature.
Okay.
But that's just one of many government agencies. Many financial institutions provide information to their customers. And so look, just around town, check with your own financial institution. And of course, universities and other institutions will provide basic financial literacy for different clients. So at the college level, there's a lot of coursework going on. Certainly at the K-12 level, it's being integrated across many many disciplines. So.
Okay.
I would sort of say test drive the financial institutions.
Okay.
While there are rules that should be followed, we know we went through the financial crisis about 6-7 years ago, and those rules were not being followed. So I would say if your bank or financial institution is not asking you tough questions, they're too eager to give you money, and you feel that you may not be able to repay the debt or you're getting in over your head, I would run. I would pick an institution that asks me good, tough questions and helps me see the level of debt that would be appropriate for me and why. That's
great counsel. Excellent counsel. I'm assuming some of our viewers today, this is great advice. Oh, this is wonderful. But they may be saying, I'm already caught in the debt trap. How do I get out? Where do I go from here? Because I already feel like I have 1,000 pounds of weight on me, if you will. What advice do you have for that viewer?
So unfortunately, too many families and individuals are caught in this trap. I would say this is a group effort. And so what you really have to do is just like we are doing, sort of get the loved ones around a table, turn off the TV, take off the phones, cut off the internet, and just talk about the situation. Children are not too young to know, in broad terms, that the family may be struggling debt-wise. You have to do some introspection. How did we get here? So be honest.
Okay.
Introspect. You have to do some planning. How do we get out of this? And again, not keeping up with the Joneses is important as we try to get out of this. And not looking for instant gratification is important as we look at it. What's another thing that's important that many times we ignore, the coin has two sides. There is a revenue side also. So we may actually end up taking on more debt to go back to school to get a degree that will lead to better employment, a higher wage rate, which will help us in the long run. So short-term planning, long-term planning, looking at those needs versus wants, and being honest with yourself. You cannot say, having 600 channels on a TV is something I just have to have. It's not a need. It's a want.
It's a want.
So being honest.
And I think that's one of the key takeaways, I think, from today's show to our viewers, is to really sit down with your family. It sounds like what you're saying, Pian and Jeff, with your children, and really starting to kind of create that list and prioritize what is a need and what is a want, and actually educating your children, that next generation, as to what is a need and what is a want. Now, what do we need to survive, right? And what do we want? That's going to maybe provide that, to your point, that instant gratification. Correct?
I would say also be patient. You got into this, it took a while. Be patient. Celebrate little victories as you move forward. Celebrate milestones. Don't be too disappointed. Don't fall off the wagon if life takes a different turn. So stay on it, stay on task, and things will work out.
So you mentioned being patient, and I guess it's going to depend based on the earning potential of the family or the individual. It's going to depend on how much debt they're in. But is there a typical timeline? Does it typically take a family 3 years, 5 years, 10 years to get out of debt? What have you seen as kind of maybe an average in the industry?
I think a lot depends on the individual situation, because we are all in different amounts of debt.
Correct.
And everyone has different earning potential. There's a certain amount of job security that we may have or may not have. So should we have 3 months in emergency savings or 6 months would depend a lot on how confident you are that your job will be there in the long run. You can have 3 months and use the rest of the money to pay off some high interest rate debt. So it depends.
Some of it's it sounds like what you're saying is a lot of this can be very subjective. There's not a one-size-fits-all model for our viewers. So you mentioned something kind of interesting, which is high interest debt. What I've heard and seen in the past is you have some individuals, let's say, or families, that are all about saving. They want to feel secure, and they think that cash cushion, that surplus, is going to give them that sense of security. You have others that say, oh, I have a lot of high interest rate debt. I'd rather pay that off first. What counsel, advice do you have for our viewers? Should they be saving? Should they be paying off first that high interest debt, or doing a combination of both?
I would say it depends on the situation. Again, I think an emergency fund is very important, because you don't want to get caught in the situation where you used all your liquid resources to pay off debt, and then you realize that you have a need, and so you end up borrowing again and maybe a higher interest rate.
It's a vicious cycle.
Right, it is. So have that emergency fund in place, and then again, it's a personal situation. If the family feels like there's a smaller loan which is lower interest rate, by paying that off, we feel better and we feel motivated to move on, that's what they should do. But from a purely accounting perspective, take the highest interest rate loan, pay it off.
Okay. Jeff, what should our viewers consider? And it may depend on, again, age, earning potential, et cetera, but what should they consider before using credit? Kind of almost backing up a little bit.
Sure, and I think it goes back to just being disciplined and having good habits. So getting into the habit of paying yourself first and doing things that are going to establish a good credit history. Because, the one thing you want to do is, if you're going to use credit, you want to get it on the best terms possible. You want to do comparison shopping, so different credit offers. Institutions are going to vary in terms of those fees and things like that. So when you're, pay off your bills on time. If you have a credit card, pay off, pay off the full amount at each month if you can, and if you can't, pay more than the minimum, because you'll end up accumulating additional interest onto what you've already paid. Those are things that really can establish some solid habits that will help you once you do have you've incurred credit and a loan, and will enable you to be more successful in paying that off in a reasonable amount of time. So,
can you expand on something you said actually in the beginning of that answer, which I love, which is pay yourself first?
Sure.
Because I read the book Richest Man in Babylon a while back, and that's one of the main themes of the book, and I think our viewers would truly benefit from maybe expanding on that a little bit.
Sure. So what we tend to do sometimes is wait until all of our expenses have been paid, and then we put our savings in. So what Pay Yourself First suggests is allocate savings right off the bat and say, I'm committed to saving X amount of my income each week or each month. And so that reduces the likelihood that you're not going to just take whatever's remaining, if anything's remaining. And so paying yourself first can be a very effective habit for building that savings, which the savings we have reduces our likelihood of needing to secure loans to buy the things we want.
If I could pick up on that, we
Please.
have to use the power of compound interest. You know, looking at examples, and of course it depends on the assumptions you're making behind the numbers, but if an individual were to start at the age of 25 and put $50 a month away into savings, versus if they started at 35, they would, their savings at the age of 65 would compound to half if they started at 35 versus 25. If they started at 45, it would be a quarter of what they would have earned if they started at 25.
Correct.
If they started at 55, it would be a tenth. And it's really unfortunate, but a lot of Americans are caught with very little money in their retirement accounts. And so start early, put a little bit away, and that is going to grow through the power of compounding.
Absolutely. It's actually a topic we covered in one of our previous shows, which is, to your point, compounding and truly understanding the time value of money. So that's a great point. So obviously, I mean, we've spoken a lot about debt and obviously how you can get into trouble with it. But are there any benefits? Maybe it's, again, let's flip it again, flip the script. What are some benefits, some positive ways we can utilize debt as a tool?
Sure. So for one, I mean, obviously we talked about, you know, access to education. There are some things, being able to purchase a home. So if that's something where you're established and you want to start to build some equity, borrowing money to buy a home, which you in most cases, you know, can appreciate and value, is a good thing. But just from an everyday way of managing purchases. So using credit cards are necessary for some sorts of transactions. You can have some consumer protection in use of a credit card when you're making a purchase. And in some cases, you know, it can be safer than cash. So if someone steals your credit card and makes purchases, you have a certain limited amount of liability on those purchases. So there are some upsides. It's a matter of just being disciplined and managing the credit wisely.
I think unfortunately what has happened is it is a slippery slope. And Jeff is certainly right. It can be and should be used appropriately for good debts, including education, buying a house, buying a safe vehicle that you can actually drive and feel comfortable in. But it's a slippery slope. And so very often individuals will get carried away, they'll get more offers in the mail, they'll activate new cards, they'll put, you know, more debt on these new cards without giving thought to the implications. So we have to catch ourselves. I know you've done a show on budgeting. Use an Excel spreadsheet, allocate X $100 for groceries, swipe your card, but when you get back home it takes 15 seconds. Reduce that number you spent.
It's great counsel, and it really goes back to, again, it's the education, but then taking ownership and taking, you know, a hold of the reins of your financial future and putting the time into it. Nothing good comes without any effort. So I think that's important. We have a couple minutes left, and you know, we've talked again about, you know, using debt, you know, borrowing, and savings. Now, how has the savings rate changed over time? Again, maybe over the past half a century. You know, what have you seen?
So it was about 11%. You know, a few decades back. We hit a low in the mid-2000s where it became a negative rate. And that blows me away, that you can have a negative savings rate. You're not only spending everything you make, you're dipping into savings or borrowing money and spending that also. The financial crisis that we went through, it jars people for a little while, and you see the interest or the savings rate go up.
The polar swings of human nature, right?
Right. But then we forget very quickly.
Anything you want to add before we...
Well, in thinking about savings, this can be a very tricky thing. Is there are some people who will dip into their retirement, their savings, and borrow from that to make purchases. And so that is, you know, depending on the circumstances, can be very difficult to recover from, particularly if you're nearing that retirement age. So that's a consideration in terms of that source. So, you know, the savings is so important and provides that cushion that allows us to avoid some of these circumstances.
So I'm going to give you guys a task here. We have, you know, 30 seconds. One sentence answer for both of you. Benefits or drawbacks of being debt-free?
The benefits, peace of mind, and you give yourself a raise. You don't have to go to the boss and ask for a raise. You get a raise.
Love it. Sure. Jeff?
So the benefits of being debt-free, obviously, it's the you know, more choices that you have. So rather than being obligated to, you're allocating your money to existing lines of credit, you can choose to do other things. And that's really what we want to be able to do, is allocate our funds to raise our greatest satisfaction.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. I hope you had as much fun as we have. We look forward to seeing you next time for a new episode of Money Sense. I'm your host, Anthony Contrucci, and remember, we always try to make finance fun.
This program is made possible by PSCA, the Plan Sponsor Council of America. For over 60 years, PSCA has served retirement plan sponsors through education, advocacy, and research. Information at psca.org or at 312-419-1863. This program was produced by Lakeshore Public Media and Centier Bank.